Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Of course, we have a good friend of the show, Harvard University Malaysia's Provost and CEO, Professor Mushtaq Al-Tabi. How are you, Prof?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much. How about you?
Like that, it's the same, but at the same time, of course, with the election season, it's going to be a little bit busy. Every time you come on to the show, it's always important to note that it's going to be thought-provoking, it's going to be riveting, it's going to be quite challenging in terms of trying to get the best out of the both of us in terms of this conversation. More so now because budget season is on the way, and of course, how does this tie up over the election, seeing how the populist views are importantly needed, but at the same time, we need all these other things in the budget. We've heard progressive wage model being debated. We've talked about the possibility of the tax, GST tax coming into play or might not come into play. Whatever it is, the budget conversation has always revolved around one or two things. Predominantly, it's going to be taxes and education or healthcare. Do you feel that this whole idea of tinkering on the fringes of the budget when it comes to, say, education is going to move the needle in terms of getting high quality education, not just at the university level, but at the K-12 level as well? Or do you feel that there's a new way of doing things, a new way of thinking that must be needed in trying to get the best out of every single cent that is being put in the budget for the education purposes?
Well, I believe that tinkering at the fringes, if it have worked in the past, it would work now. I really think that we have been trying to do all this, tinkering at the fringes, and it didn't work. Now, in preparation for this, Ibrahim, I went and looked at data from the World Bank and other sources. And do you know that Malaysia is among the countries that spend the highest on higher education as a percentage of GDP? It's over 2%. This is where Canada and other advanced countries are. Mm-hmm. Now, if you take into account that this money is spent on public universities rather than the private, yeah, that actually it makes it equivalent to 4%. If you correct for that. So, yeah. So we are actually spending quite a bit of, quite a high percentage of our GDP on higher education.
But sorry to interrupt, but when you talk about Canada higher education, you're talking about McMaster University, UBC, University of British Columbia, McGill University. These are high quality universities that really speak volumes in terms of the quality of output of the graduates there. 2% Canada, 2% Malaysia, but we're not seeing our local universities, especially public universities, in terms of that level of UBC, McMaster's, McGill, and you name it.
So that's exactly the point. First of all, to be fair, we actually have very high-ranking universities in the country, and that's great. But at the same time, you look at the challenges we are facing in terms of graduate employability, which is one of the biggest challenges we are facing here. So let me give you another piece of data, and then maybe I could suggest some way ahead. So if you look at the GDP per capita for Malaysia, it has been steadily growing, not as much as we wanted, steadily growing. By 2021, which is the latest I could get the information from the World Bank, ours was 26,333 USD GDP per capita. Now, this is still higher than many of the countries around us, but not Singapore. Singapore, the GDP per capita is around 106,032 USDs. So they are more than 4 times what we have in Malaysia. So I think what we need is also to raise the GDP per capita so that the percentage of it that is allocated for healthcare and education and others is higher. And I believe that education, particularly higher education, will play a key role when we invest in it in the right way in helping us achieve a higher GDP per capita.
Nobody is going to say that what you're saying is wrong. The issue is how. How do we get from that whole idea of trying to extract the best so that the GDP pie grows even further, so that we get more money into the education funding?
Fantastic. So if you look at the higher education system now, we have around 1.2 million students in Malaysia. 700,000 of them are in public universities, and 500,000 are in private universities and colleges and so on. I believe we need to move into a system in which we harmonize both public and private. So let me give you an example. How about we fund both private and public based on the employability of the graduates? So if, for example, a certain university can show that there is a higher level of employability of its graduates, we as government could give...
Incentivize.
And we could give the students a voucher that they could cash it at any university, and then they will be starting to use... We move more students into the universities where you have higher employability rates, and that will make the universities able to invest even further in courses that are relevant to the economy, relevant to the development that we are having. So that's just one of the ideas. I know it's quite controversial, but we really need to move into this. The other bit is...
It's not controversial, sorry. I'm toying with communist ideas already on Twitter. I'm talking about, direct cash handouts as a way of reduction of subsidies, food coupons for improving...
I saw that tweet.
Yeah, I'm like, it's crazy for me to even say these things 5 years ago, because I wouldn't want to subscribe to this kind of thinking. But your idea of, say, giving these kind of vouchers to students entering universities with a high rate of employability and perhaps make the mobility of them even further, grow further in their studies, it's not controversial anymore, Prof.
That's fantastic. The other thing that we could do, I think all our universities, including public universities, need to declare the true cost of educating a student.
It's going to be so expensive.
I believe it's going to be so expensive, and then we could deal with it, because you see, if you go to a university where the rent of the land and the rent of the buildings is not factored into the cost, of course the cost would look quite low. Now the key thing here is
the lab, the machinery, the equipment,
all of that,
calibration of the equipment.
Now the thing is, we could actually declare that real cost, and we use this to price at least international students' fees, because currently it's much cheaper for an international student to study at a public university. I think in that way we are sort of subsidizing other countries' citizens. So I believe that we have capacity within the higher education system. To have that capacity, we need more international students. As you know, our target was always to get 250,000 international students, and now we are at less than 50,000 students in the entire higher education system. Now imagine reaching the 250 or even more and charging them the real cost. I think that would change the structure, but at the same time there are so many secondary benefits for the economy in terms of their spending, but also in terms of attracting more talent that will hopefully make the country even more attractive to foreign companies, foreign investment, because the talent is and will remain a bottleneck. Particularly now you talk about data science and artificial intelligence and all of that. So I think education, and particularly higher education, is situated in the sweet spot of all of that. I think when we fix it, when we get the right universities, the right courses, the right pedagogy, the right curriculum, price it right, attract more students in, get even our own youth who are questioning the value of a degree, because if you go to a university and then you can't get a job at the end of the day,
what's the point?
What's the point?
I'm just wasting 4 years. My cohort is getting a job 4 years ago already, albeit at a lower skill job lah.
Yeah, but you see, sometimes I was looking the other day at an ad from Lala Move. I think they are advertising for a lorry driver starting salary at 3,700 something. Now, this is actually higher than some fresh grads. So I think all of these things need to be looked at, because as an economy, we are stuck. We are
stuck, Prof. Let me tell you this. I've had enough guests coming to the studio, sitting where you're sitting. None of them are CEOs, and they're asking me the same thing, which is they can't get the right talent, they can't get the right people to supplement their top end of the work structure. It was as recent as last week when Securities Commission came declared on air 50% of their workforce is above 50. Only 8% of their workforce is below 30. Right. In a sector as critical as Securities Commission. no young people want to come in, or they don't feel that the young people that go through the rigorous training process fit the bill.
Yes.
Youth unemployment is 9%. So you're having a lot of youth unemployment. Many of them have degrees. Companies like Securities Commission and all the others can't find young people to supplement the workforce. We're in a crisis, I suppose.
I agree with you, and I think that's why we need to introduce that competition. And if we use employability as the key, I think that will really force universities to change, both private and public, because they will compete for the students, for the right students. They will compete for these vouchers that would come from within. You know, it's very expensive to market for international students. It costs us so much money to even attract foreign students in. So I think that, but the international students is an important thing where we need to work with the government to make the visa process easier and all of that. And there are other ways to actually introduce things immediately without having to spend much money. I give you maybe one or two examples. Heriot-Watt University is a Scottish university, and we are benefiting from a system that the Scottish government did for all the Scottish universities, where it helped them come together to negotiate a national deal for the databases that we use in our libraries. So we have access to all the databases in the world by virtue of negotiating that at a national level. So anyone who is a student of a Scottish university will have access to that anywhere in the world. I think we need to do something similar in Malaysia, where both private and public universities come together and negotiate for these databases for journals and periodicals and so on, rather than each university goes on their own and buy it, because this is going to be very, very expensive. Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is to see the investment that we are making in research facilities, partly in the great public universities, as a national investment rather than a university an investment in that university alone. And then we incentivize the collaboration. So if you are having the best microscope or the best fMRI machine or whatever, you need to allow other people to work with you so that they could use it. So that, again, we don't replicate the instrument in each and every university. I think I'm personally and essentially and fundamentally optimistic, because Malaysia is a great place, is stable, nice people. Our youth are quite motivated, and I think we need to work with that so that we go to the next level.
And the strange part is that we are at the advent of AI revolution. We are able to harness the capability of automating these kind of shared resources. We just put the parameters in and everything is sorted by itself. We can actually have greater resource sharing, and we spend little to no energy in trying to get that organized. Do you feel that the ability for us to do this is here? We need a thinker, we need a proactive person to get this done, because I don't see any downside in this.
Well, I think the political will is very important, because I honestly feel that we have very smart people in private sector, in the government. I talk to them, they are very, very smart. So I think if we can communicate this right to the people so that they know that this is actually in the midterm to long term will be fantastic for the country, for this generation, for the next generation, because at the end of the day it's about people. And I think that these pain points, whereby the fresh graduate salary is not high, there is not too many great employability opportunities, we losing talent in exactly the areas that you talked about to neighboring countries, Singapore, which would pay them maybe 3-4 times what we can afford. I think we need to do something about it. So the pain of all of that, I hope and I believe, should be a reason for us to move and do something different.
You're making the case of inter-education, public-private sector collaboration. What about the triple helix model, where the collaboration between industry and government is also being put in place on top of education? Because when you see shared resources happening everywhere, when you talk about sharing of MRI machines, for instance, there are some hospitals with underutilized MRI machines. There are hospitals with overutilized. You have to take queues, and the queue runs into months.
Right.
So how do you see these kind of collaboration taking place? Do you think that that's also possible?
It's absolutely possible, but I think in the beginning we need to have the collaboration within the sector itself, because if the sector itself is fragmented,
and then
it's actually very
game
difficult.
over, yeah.
But if we are actually working on that together, I think that will make us even more attractive for the industry to work with us, because at the end of the day you have all this great variety and spectrum of capabilities, of experiences, of locations, and all of that is actually a source of strength for all of us. So I think at the end of the day, I think we need to create very clear sort of guidelines for competition. And I actually would like to argue for employability, because these are things that employability at a certain pay, because some people could just say, oh, all my graduates are working because they are working for Grab or whatever. No, if you are an engineer, you need to be employed as an engineer. If you are a lawyer, you need to be employed as a lawyer, and so on and so forth. And these things we do have the data for, and I think that will definitely create a change. In the beginning, there will be a little bit of disturbance, but I think that disruption is very important, because without disruption, it's very difficult to make any person who's leading a university or teaching at a classroom or doing anything within any organization to change their ways.
We have to also think about the entrepreneurship level of thinking, where you can't rely on government policies every time, all the time. You're looking at perhaps individuals, startups even, trying to take these initiatives into their own hands. They need to collaborate with public universities, private universities. Do you feel that that is a possibility for us to get this done through that channel instead of top-down?
Well, I think there are entrepreneurial individuals at all levels, and they are doing the best, and they are doing what they can do. I can give you examples of how we develop, for example, entrepreneurial capabilities at my university. Every one of our students in the first year has to run a crowdfunding campaign and raise money for an NGO that is related to their sense of purpose. We talked about that.
Yeah.
But we have 2,000 students. I'm talking about 1.2 million students in the higher education system. So the question to us again, do we want to just leave things to sort of naturally grow on its own, or do we want to use the toolbox? Because the government's toolbox is what? Is the budget and the policy tools. And I think when we do things like that, I do believe that we will have a faster and a bigger change sort of rate.
Let's talk about the cancer. It's currently at stage 4 right now, afflicting the higher education right now. And the cancer, the disease that we're talking about is the silo mentality of practitioners within the higher education. You're looking at, we don't have tenure-ship professors, but the idea here is that when you have a career academic who is now promoted to the highest office of that particular university, they tend to be very territorial to a point where it became militant, that no other people can come in to show them how to do things better. I'm talking about outside and of course inside, when you have deans going up to the VCs saying that this should be the way, of improvement, of efficiency. But then there would be not just hesitancy or rejection, just flat out, I guess, militant. There's no other way to put this. Now no policy can solve that. How do you approach this topic, Prof? Because now we're talking about psychology and humanities.
Well,
first of all, do you acknowledge there's a problem?
Sure. Well, sure. Maybe there are some universities that have that issue, but I think at the end of the day, what gets measured gets done. So currently, you have a system in which people are promoted, academics are promoted based on the number of papers that they publish and the number of citations and so on. And it's quite an individualistic process, to be the best at that very narrow field of yours. It's the reality of the matter. But if we start actually gauging people for the number of collaborations that they have, the number of sharings they have, I think there are ways to measure it in that way. At the same time, I think having a clear sense of purpose, I think, needs to be communicated, because if the academics' goal in life is to get, professorship or to be a DVC, and the pathway to that is to tick these certain things, you are we are doomed because we've built the pathway in that way. But if we are saying we want purpose-driven leaders, we want leaders who are selfless, we want leaders who are critical thinkers.
Collaborators.
And collaborators, exactly. I think then we will promote for that. And then we'll look for, and people will see.
We already have that in the private sector. Industry, I mean. I'm not talking about higher education. Where higher collaborators tend to get better promotions, better pay, better jobs. Why not just do it here?
I honestly don't see anything that is stopping us from doing any of that. It's at the
so
end
you're
of the
talking
day,
about the critical failure is that the design itself, the matrix of how you measure, that builds people to be like that.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, even if you look at the way we are measuring universities, we are measuring even ranking universities in this country. So let me give you an example. In the UK, we have something called research assessment framework. And in that, the way we do it is a university will present its best cases of its best researchers, best collaborations, and so on, to a committee that will look at all of that. And then they will say your assessment is at that level and the other university at that level. While in Malaysia, we prefer to deal with numbers. So how many papers, how many PhD students, how many citations, and that actually leads to a system in which people start to play the entire system to increase these numbers. And that's why sometimes you see a sort of a ranking that may not reflect or correspond to the reality.
Yeah.
So I think
my alma mater tends to rank lower on QS, and I don't feel that's the case.
Yeah, and you know, there are some universities who actually go out of their way to manipulate this by speaking to certain people, encouraging them to vote and so on. And those who don't do that will
drop out.
Will drop.
And again, to harken back to what you were mentioning earlier, we can use the government's toolbox through budgetary policies and budgetary deployment.
That's right.
To actually fix this. Do you feel that these kind of ideas are currently being talked about at that policy level right now into the, say, budget preparation office of the MOF?
I think so, because the Minister of Higher Education has commissioned a study by Pantau, and they have this National Review Committee, Education Review Committee, which went for a lab. They listened to all of us, and we contributed our ideas through that. So the ideas have been discussed, and I'm actually now quite optimistic that we have enough awareness and hopefully enough political will to at least introduce some of these suggestions really in the very near future, because otherwise it's going to be quite difficult for the higher education as a sector to remain even financially sustainable. And if
what is at risk right now if there is no harmonization between private and public universities and growing that economic pie?
So let me tell you, 63% of private universities and colleges are running a loss. Now this is a place where we have 500,000 of our students studying.
In Malaysia?
Yes. Yes. Oh. And if we this data is not for me, this is from Pantau, because they were running the lab, 63%. Now, this is the place where we have 500,000 of our students, mainly Malaysians, in. Now, if there is a collapse in the sector, I think that will be, quite difficult for the public universities to absorb all of that. So I do believe that we need to harmonize both private and public sector and see them as equal players in the provision of this very important service. Currently, the view of the private universities is that they are businesses, they are taxed, they are, and I think all of that could change. We could again help the universities by giving them the tax back payments if they are giving the economy.
Yeah, we're already doing that for other industries. Why not the higher education?
Why not the higher education? And then we could do it in a way that they have to invest it in, better pedagogy, better professors. So rather than we just see them as a source of tax, which is fair, but I think we could also help them to remain sustainable. So I think all of that could be done, and we could be seen in a sort of a long-term kind of view, because at the end of the day, it's education and higher education that will create the talent. And the talent will mean the economy of the country will remain sustainable or not.
Final question to you, Prof, is on the topic of lobbyists or people that can communicate the wishes of that particular industry to the government and government policymakers. We've seen how bad industries like tobacco have excellent lobbyists. We're seeing how the EV industry have, which I am okay, I suppose, as an industry, because what's the alternative? More ICE cars. But they do have good lobbyists trying to convey the kind of wishes to the government and make policies that is beneficial to that particular industry. One area of concern that I have is that academics are generally nice people, and they don't generally have to hire lobbyists or people that can communicate the wishes of that particular industry to the government. How are you going to solve for this?
Well, currently, Ibrahim, you know that we have a body that called the Vice Chancellor's Council for Private Universities. I chair that for now. And we have been really reaching out to the ministry. We met the minister, we reached out to the MQA, we met the CEO, we were part of the Pumandu Lab. So we have been actually making our voice heard. And I think that is probably sufficient for now. Yeah, because you see, the reason is I honestly feel if education needs lobbying, I think there's something wrong. I could see why tobacco needs lobbying.
Yes.
But education, this is the future
It's
of your
public
children
good,
and
yeah.
my children and everybody's children.
Yeah.
And I really think that we should just put our best ideas forward and best intentions forward. And I'm very optimistic. Malaysia is really a great place.
And I don't see anybody opposing these kind of activities.
Yes, because it's education. It's really one of the best industries to be in.
Yeah.
No one will say don't invest in education.
Nobody.
People will oppose to you reducing the tax on tobacco and alcohol, for example.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prof, for taking the time to speak with us. Final word, Prof, before we conclude the conversation.
Well, I have been repeating this again.
Repeat some more.
Let me repeat it again. First of all, I'm very optimistic. Malaysia is a great place. I see that focus on education. Parents want their children to be educated. I also know for a fact that for Malaysia to triple and quadruple its GDP per capita, talent is very important. And talent is what we do at higher education. So let's work together to make this great place, because together we can do that.
That was Harrod Ward University Malaysia's Provost and CEO, Professor Mushtaq Al-Atabi. Again, I promised you that we'll have this monthly conversations on, because I think these kind of conversations actually can push that needle forward for the country. If you want to learn more, just head off to their website and find out more about Harrod Ward and, of course, the Council of VCs that the Prof was talking about or alluded to earlier. You can also go to astro.com and find all the resources that can be found there as well. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.